All right.
Well, hello, my friends. This is Between Two Sundays with Mark Gladman and my esteemed colleague, Mark Beresford, who you're looking very regal. That light is like bouncing off your hair, man. That's awesome. I love it.
Fantastic. That's what I want to hear.
Look, let's just say it's better that than the hair dye route.
I've given up on.
I'm enjoying the grey, I must say, and yours too. I like yours too.
It suits you. Suits you very well.
Makes me feel wise. That's the optimum word there. It is Between Two Sundays.
One day.
Right there.
One day you'll go silver instead of grey.
Yeah, and then I'll know it. Between Two Sundays, we don't normally talk hair. We talk about the readings that have been and the readings that are coming. Yeah. And of course, we're right in the midst of Lent. We had Lent 5 last week. We've got Lent 6 or Passion Sunday or Palm Sunday or whatever you want to refer to it. And this coming Sunday. So really quick, it's a big reading for this week. So let's just really quickly talk about where we came out of last week. Last week, the thing that really stuck with me, man, was the extravagance of Mary Magdalene's offering of the ointment and the stark display of intimacy and generosity that was.
Yes.
And I was really reflecting on, am I giving all? I looked it up. Nard, and I put it in the thing for the thing, but nard comes from the Himalayas, man. So no wonder it was so expensive. They had to ship it down from the Himalayas to Jerusalem. So, it's something like 20 grand's worth of perfume would have been broken on Jesus' feet in today's terms.
Crazy extravagant.
And I want to serve God extravagantly, not just, and I mean, when you think about it, if people carrying the image of God, I want to be breaking flasks of oil and perfume over people's feet and be extravagant about it and not hold back. So that's pretty simple, but that's sort of where I was at this week. What about you?
Oh, I stuck with the same passage. I found myself simply stunned by Mary's humility to listen. So I know we said a lot about this last week, but the capacity for her to hear Jesus rather than fight Jesus. Yeah. Even when everyone else is fighting, resisting, not believing, finds all this too much to even comprehend. She seems to, her humility allows her to hear what is true and what everyone else can't. And I am just filled with admiration for her capacity to do that. Even if she can't articulate it, which I don't think she can, she goes into this symbolic space and breaks the perfume over Jesus' feet. Jesus gets it, but maybe she even can't articulate why she's doing this yet.
Well, you did say, and I think it's important that maybe she's possibly one of the only ones who gets it at this point too. That's another possibility, which I think remember you saying that. That's beautiful.
I think she is the first one to hear everything Jesus is repeatedly saying about his coming suffering, death, and resurrection. And I think she's the first to hear it. And I'm left stunned by that, actually. I think it's remarkable that she has the capacity to hear that God is behaving so differently to everything we ever imagined. And I think it's partly because she's so beautifully humble.
Yeah. Cool. And if you've missed any of last week, go back and have another listen. And perhaps if you want to talk to us about what you drew out of last week's readings, we'd really love to hear about it. And then go to our places, which you'll find in the link tree down here or on the show notes if you're in the podcast, and you'll be able to link up with us and let us know where you were at. So we are coming to the end of Lent, Lent 6 or Palm Sunday / Passion Sunday. The readings we're going to be using today are the readings for Passion Sunday. That's mainly because some of the readings for Palm Sunday are double ups from things that we've already discussed. So the readings that we'll be focusing on this week are Isaiah chapter 50, verses 4 to 9a, Psalm 31, verses 9 to 18, Philippians 2, verses 5 to 11, and the big one, which always comes up this time of year, Luke 22, verse 14 to 23, verse 56. Please stand for the reading, and everyone goes, oh. But all those references will be in the show notes, and you'll be able to find them there. So yeah, it's a big week, and that the gospel passage out of Luke is literally 1 2/3 of the chapter, nearly 2 whole chapters of the Gospel of Luke that we are listening to this coming Sunday. And look, what I drew out of this was pretty simple. And it was interesting that in reflecting on the gospel, in a way that I haven't reflected on the gospel in the past, I'll just throw in very quickly just for a second. But then when I went back and read the Isaiah and the Psalm and the Philippians passage, boy, it really resonated strongly with them at what came out. So the thing that's important to know about this gospel this week is there is so much content in it. If you're preaching from it, please don't preach at all. You'll be there for 5 hours. It's just so many things in there. We've got the Last Supper, we've got the betrayal, we've got the garden, we've got the judgment, we've got the whole kit and caboodle. It's all in there. And the reason why this was possibly easy for me to come to is our abbot set for us a task this Lent, apart from wanting to know what our Lenten observance would be, as every good abbot does to their monks. He also asked us to watch the Passion of the Christ and imagine ourselves in the crowd as we watched, and to reflect back to him how it is we see ourselves participating in the crucifixion. Now, what's important about the reason why I raise that is because when I'm writing this, I realized that it's probably one of the first times that I have truly embraced, understood what I think about the crucifixion. And what I'm talking about here is I'm talking about the different atonement theories. And it's simple enough for me to say that I don't adhere to a penal substitution atonement theory. I don't resonate with a scapegoat theory. I think some of those theories don't, the idea that God had to punish Jesus in order for me to feel better about myself doesn't make sense when we're looking at God through a lens of love, that God is love. And so what I said back to my abbot, and this will bring us to what I think about this reading, because obviously the Passion of the Christ is pretty much, although it's based on the Gospel of John, this is pretty much the Passion of the Christ. Read the book, don't wait for the movie, read this part. But what I said to the abbot was that what I saw as I stood in the crowd watching the goings on of this whole story being played out on the screen, and I imagined myself watching these events taking place, is I realized what I was watching was love in action. I saw love being demonstrated, the highest sort of love being demonstrated when humanity is literally at humanity's lowest. I saw the action of forgiveness played out when it would have been so hard to offer that forgiveness. I saw non-violence being enacted when it would have been so easy to strike back. And I said, after I sort of just noted a few things in my paragraph to the abbot, I said that I find myself seeing in Jesus the person that I should be. And what I've realized is that when we talk about being crucified with Christ, what I'm talking about is crucifying the bits of me that are not attuned with the love of Christ being planted in the world. And that my crucifixion is to crucify anything that holds me back from not just listening to the gospel, but hearing it and going and living in action with it. So the essential core of what I pulled from everything that you read, all the way through, all of those different things in that long, it's not just a short chapter too, it's a 56 verse chapter, the chapter 20.
Yeah.
And this whole sense of, this thing being played out, love is the key. Love is the source. Love is what's there. And what we see in that whole situation is what we should be looking like. And so when you're living this, love is the core. And what's really cool then, if you have a look at, the Isaiah 50, and you're reading things like, "It is the Lord who helps me, who will declare me guilty," you realize that this is not about Jesus dying so that God can see me better. God has already called me good. What this is, it's understanding that when I live the way that Jesus has called me to live, I can live free of guilt. That when I live out of love, that there is no guilt to be had because I'll be living well. When we read the passage in Philippians, which is that wonderful hymn of becoming like Christ, and that hymn of what Christ was like, taking off that God connectedness in order to become man. And I realized that this is what I should be doing. I should be putting off all those things that are not in that imago Dei, that image of God that lives within me, that I should be putting these things aside. And it's dawned on me that the whole Easter story is about that. It's the culmination. This is Jesus who's been teaching for 3 years. It's interesting too. I've been reading, you've heard me talk about Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff Jesus' Childhood Power by Christopher Moore. I happen to be reading that at the same time right now. And I'm also reading from my own personal Lenten study, a book by Albert Lachance, which is a look through John's Gospel through a unitive lens. And I'm actually reading the passages around the end of John's Gospel right now. So the whole crucifixion story. And this idea of Jesus who's been preaching for 3 years, and in this very action of what's going on at the cross is literally Jesus saying, "Have you guys not understood a thing I've said for the last 3 years? Let me show you. There's an opportunity now for me to show you. This is what it looks like." And then, Albert Lachance has this great part in his book where he talks about how the cross is an amazing image, because when you remember that there was a penitent thief on one side of Jesus and there was a non-penitent thief on the other side of Jesus, you've got the very core of what it means for people to be humble and to ask forgiveness and to seek, that connection with God. And you've got somebody else who rejects that. And yet here is Jesus with arms each side, pointing to each one of them. Then you have, and this is beautiful, I never thought of this one before, you got the base of the cross that's struck into the earth, and you got the top of the cross that's pointing to the heavens, literally pulling heaven and earth together, literally pulling these two poles of humanity together. And what does it say? We talked about this a few weeks ago. Jesus says, "I will reconcile all things to myself." And then literally there on the cross, there's this image, this picture of heaven and earth, and these all different poles of humanity being drawn together into Christ, who is there nailed to a cross, because humanity at its lowest is going to do this to people. And Jesus says, "Let me show you what happens when this happens. You simply continue to love as I've been teaching you to love." So I know I've talked for a little bit, and I'll probably wrap up.
That's good.
But it was just amazing, because it was sort of like, this is so simple. Why have I never seen this before? Maybe because it was 3 years ago we had these readings. But in all seriousness, it's just, it reminds me. I say quite a lot, and I put it in hashtags all the time. It's not rocket science. Living for God is not rocket science. We make it so complicated. We make it so complex. And this great big long reading, and this, Christological hymn, and this, prophecy from Isaiah, it all points to the same thing. It all points to this space of love and forgiveness and generosity and peace that comes when we understand that we are reconciled to God, and Jesus showed us how to find that space and place.
Yeah. Beautiful. I'm a big fan of this reading being in the lectionary. I think we break up the books of, we break up the scriptural narrative, especially of the Gospels, far too much. So I'm a huge fan of a big chunk like this, especially around Easter. Partly because I'm with Paul in Colossians, where he says, where he describes Jesus as an icon of God. An icon is a picture that you look into and you see beyond.
Yeah.
Jesus is the perfect icon of God, and it's here we see really the coming together of perfect love and the worst that humanity gets involved in. So we are capturing a glimpse of the love of God that even is displayed in an unloving world. And we're getting a glimpse of what happens in that scenario when perfect, humble love comes together with hatred and violence and fear. We get, firstly, the death of the one who loves. But without wanting to rush forward to the end of the story, we also get a glimpse that God resurrects this one, that the heart of the world, the heart of creation, is on the side of perfect sacrificial love.
Yeah.
That is a radically different vision of the world. And so I'm a big fan of us reading this whole story. I think I just really like the fact that we're sitting with something that's in some ways beyond imagining, in some ways is so captivating for us, that the world is like this, or that God is like this. And in other ways so far beyond our capacity to understand. And yet we have sitting next to this the Philippians reading, which is saying, look at this account of God, look at the crazy claims that are being made here, and learn to live the same way.
Yes.
That is the most extraordinarily hopeful statement for humanity. The hopeful idea that under the grace of God, this staggering love, in reflection on this story, we can actually learn to live like this in an unloving world. And it's no wonder. It's no wonder Jesus expects us to be misunderstood in that context. And Jesus is demonstrating that the perfect love of God is deeply misunderstood in our world. And if you embrace this path, so will you. You will look odd, like a foreigner, one from someone else, somewhere else. We end up living in a system that the world is learning to see rather than already sees clearly. So we end up moving in a very, very different direction. But just the most wonderful, wonderful vision, really. The most wonderful vision that love can manifest itself like this. I think it's very, very good for us to sit at least once a year and hear this story in its vastness, in its complexity, and its movement, which I think we miss a lot when we break it up too much. Whenever I came across this reading and some of the other very long ones around Easter and the Passion, I would, as an Anglican minister, when I was following this, I would always read it, and I would cut my sermon right down in order to make space for people to just hear the story. And if they didn't understand it in its entirety, I was learning to trust that the Spirit would use the story. And I think that's a trust well placed, that this story, if we can hear it, ponder it, play with it, imagine into it, really is a reshaping story. It's asking something radically different to what we generally glimpse around the world.
Yeah. Look, as an aside, I think there's something really important what you just said. We'd be far better off, I think, a lot of the time, shortening sermons and lengthening the time we spend pondering scripture together as a community. I think that'd be far more wiser use of our time of gathering.
We have fallen for the trap that there's an expert up the front who can tell us what this says.
Well,
but I worship in a Baptist setting at the moment, and honestly, the Baptist foundations would say the Spirit of God speaks through everyone. If you want to understand Scripture, you will have to listen to a whole lot of voices around you.
Yes,
and it's a shame that we seem to be in a system that channels that through one who we consider to be an expert. And if we take that too literally, it can actually be a way of stopping us pondering the story, scaring us from pondering the story, making us fearful of doing that, fearful of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
But this is presented as a narrative and is fundamentally asking us to engage our imagination with it. That is the only possibility. You don't tell a kid a story because you don't want them to imagine. You actually do it precisely because you do want them to imagine. And that is what's going on here. This is a narrative being told to us, and when we break it down into principles, we actually lose something fundamental about the text.
Yeah. There's something haunting too about that passage from Philippians. Christ did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. And
yes,
we need to be careful to ensure that we live the same way, that we don't consider our status, our position, even our connection with God, something to be grasped, but to be willing to let it go. And this actually is quite a challenging thing, to think that Jesus' godliness and godlikeness, he was willing to let go of. Think about all the piousness that we might live with in order to, in our mind, live in a way that would be a demonstration of God, or a witness of God in the world, not quite understanding that sometimes the best thing we can do is let that go and just be who we are. Don't get hung up on the religious stuff, if I can put it that way. And just be human and have that human interaction with people and with God together, and live out of the conviction of what it is that Jesus taught, which is exactly, again, what we see in that narrative from the table to the cross. We see Jesus interacting with his disciples. We see Jesus interacting with Romans. We see Jesus interacting with the religious establishment, Jesus interacting with people in the street, Jesus interacting with strangers, Jesus interacting with government. And yet in all those things, never once did Jesus sort of swan it about and say, well, do your worst, because, you know, I'm the Son of God, I'm coming back to get you. And in fact, didn't even stay quiet about it and then do it. It just never happened, because it's not in the heart of who Jesus was and what Jesus was called to teach. It's not in the heart of the Spirit, the Christ that Jesus bore. It's not in the heart of God to be that way. So nor should it be in the heart of us. You know, a little while ago, we're talking with someone about love the sinner, hate the sin. I hate that saying. I hate it with a passion. And I realized why. I've always hated it, because it's bandied around, and it says a lot of things that I wasn't sure I really liked, but I sort of really nailed down why it was I hated it. And it had to do with the fact that while we might love the sin or hate the sin, we don't punish the sin. Our reaction is to punish the sinner. And so what we see here in
theory
is the absolute embodiment of how we need to respond to people who treat us poorly. The absolute embodiment to how we should, respond to people who struggle to live in ways that society would say this is a sort of a standard, if you like. And I'm certainly not saying just let people wander free to do whatever they want. But I'm saying our natural inclination is to say, well, I'm going to get you and you're going to hurt. But Jesus doesn't say that. Jesus says, I'm going to be here for you and I'm going to love you. And I wonder, having done some work in the justice system in the past and still have a mild connection to it, how much better we would be if we could find some really, really powerful ways to get rid of this penal substitutionary atonement theory that seems to feed into how we treat other human beings when they commit offenses and crimes. How much better would it be if we approached it with love? And this is where you get warped things like, oh yes, but God loves us by, throwing people into hell or punishing people with this, that, or the other. And I'm like, no, no, it doesn't go there. This is learning to love in the way that God loves us. And I'm sorry, but God loved me at my worst and hasn't once punished me for being at my worst. Hasn't let me go off scot-free either. There's been challenges and there's been some sanding back and there's been some corners and edges to, soften, but not once.
It seems to me that going against the grain of who we are created to be. So we're created in the image of this perfect, loving God.
Yeah.
Going against that grain, I think it holds its own cost. I don't want to say punishment, but cost. There's nothing natural about going against the grain of the way you are designed.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that's the effect of sin on us, is that we forget who we are supposed to be, who we are, in whose image we are designed. We forget who we are.
Yeah.
So we tend to think of this as, a story that's all about God, but as soon as it's about God and we are made in that image, it's also about us. So the two are, as we learn about God through pondering the stories of Jesus, we are inherently learning about who we are designed to be.
Yes.
And hopefully seeing where we are going against the grain of that. Because that's where we hurt. The other thing I loved about what you were saying there is you said learning. You used the term learning. I think we're always learning in this space. I have taken to calling when people ask me who I am, how do I describe myself, how do I describe my faith, I've taken to saying I'm a student of Christian mysticism. And the student part is really important to me, because I just can't, I just know how often I'm falling and how much I've yet to learn. And I think this is probably going to be a good way to describe ourselves for eternity. Even when we see God face to face in all of God's fullness, we will still be learners. After all, the love of God is infinite, so we can learn for all eternity and discover for all eternity. And as we discover more, we can genuinely be worshipping forever. That's how big the love of God is. That's how vast the love of God is. That's how unlike us it is.
What a way to wrap up Lent. Which, I mean, and think about it, not only is that a great way to wrap up Lent, but it also sets us up for next week, which is going to be the Easter weekend. Now, on the show next week, we're only going to be talking about the readings for Sunday, but I think, Mark, you'd agree with me when I say to everybody, you really need to have a look through the readings for the Maundy Thursday, the Good Friday, and the Holy Saturday, which is my favorite day of the Easter weekend as well. But what a setup for, if Easter, and we might talk about this a little bit more next week, but if Easter is the culmination and the central celebration and festival of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, then all the things we've just discussed, what a summation of what our 40 days of Lent have been about, but what a setup for what is core to who we are. How powerful is that? Incredible.
Wonderful. I love Easter as a celebration of the core of our story, and I think we need to take 40 days to prepare to hear this story again. It is so unlike what we imagine it is. We have to prepare to hear it again. Otherwise, we do crazy things, insane things, like get used to it and expect God to behave this way. This is the kind of story that absolutely should be throwing us off balance every time we hear it.
Every year, yes.
It should be that unexpected for us. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't celebrate it and build on our knowledge and read the story over and over again, but honestly, it is so extraordinarily different to anything we could have imagined.
Oh yeah.
And which is where it's radically good news.
What a great note to finish on. So thanks for being with us for this week for Between Two Sundays. We'll be back next week between this Sunday and Easter Sunday, and we'll be talking more about those readings then. As always, engage with the articles on Mark's website, barefootfollower.life /lectionary, I think it is.
Yes, that's right.
You'll find it there. Over on Twitter, we are, sorry, not at Twitter, at Instagram, we are at Between Two Sundays. That's between number 2 Sundays. And you can engage with our reflections there. And please, on the comments and direct messages and stuff, keep those things coming in. Or here, doing the comments in Twitter. Forgot about, not Twitter, I said it again, YouTube. Jump on the comments there too and let us know what you're getting from the readings and where you're going at them with them. Well, my friend, that's it. I'll see you next week for another Between Two Sundays.
Good to see you, Mark.
Being with us, and you too, my friend. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.
See ya.